Hello, my name is Danny Nowlan and I'm the Director of ChassisSim Technologies. What I'd like to discuss with you today is how straightforward and how easy it is to get going with ChassisSim Professional Online. In particular, how to get a model going in a matter of minutes using ChassisSim Professional Online. Now, what we're about to discuss here just doesn't apply for ChassisSim Professional Online. It actually applies throughout the whole ChassisSim series. We're just sort of focusing in on Professional Online on the simple principle that ChassisSim Professional Online is a really good entry point into ChassisSim. Now, the reason that we're doing this tutorial is that when you're first presented with race car simulation, it has this reputation of being incredibly difficult, something that only true professionals who are getting paid six-figure salaries in any appropriate currency need to tackle. Well, today I'm here to really dispel that myth, and what we're going to be doing today is that I'm going to show you really your plan of attack of how to go from a setup sheet, how to get some data, and then put that to and the processes to put that all together to get some basic correlation going. Now, it's not going to show you what the complete model is. It's not going to be a complete model. However, what it will do is it will get you going. And let me sort of kick this off by dispelling one huge myth of race car simulation. One of the things that I've seen with race car simulation is that people get so obsessed with the perfect model, they cannot see the forest through the trees. And one of the big mistakes I see made with race car simulation is that when you put a simulation model together, everyone thinks you've got to put a simulated model down to the last little nut and bolt. Well, I can tell you right now, if you start that way, you're going to get nowhere really, really quickly. You start from a simple model first, then once you've got things going, then you can drill down on the details. Do not do it the other way. You will get yourself hopelessly lost. So let's get started. So typically, So what we're going to do is the first step in this process is to bring up a setup sheet. Now, as we can see here, I've got a pretty basic setup sheet of all my vehicle parameters, which in this case is a twin-shock formula-free car around Zandvoort. Now, before I even get going, I want to talk to you about a little bit of basic ChassisSim housekeeping. As you can see here, what I've done here is that I've set up a folder structure for ChassisSim, and I would strongly suggest that when you're getting going with ChassisSim, you follow this directory structure to the letter. And as you can see here, in ChassisSim Technologies, I've got a models folder, I've got a car file name folder, which is in this case Formula 309, and in here I've got my particular circuit, which is Zandvoort. Let's open this up. As you can see, what I've got here is that I've got my setup sheet, and I've got my monster file. These other files that you see here we create along the way, and I'm going to go through how to do that very, very shortly. Now, but the point is, you always put your monster file and your car file in the same directory as each other, and you do it in models, car name, track name, and I'd even drill down to event name. That way, because the way the ChassisSim works is that when it goes through and it generates bump profiles, tire force modeling files, etc., it does that in the same directory as that you've got your current car file saved. So I really can't ram that point home soon enough. And if you stick to that for the time being, things will go really smoothly for you. Also, too, I would strongly suggest if you are a beginner, when ChassisSim installs, it will install to a folder called C ChassisSim Technologies. Put your models folder in there. Do not try and get cute like putting it in my documents, etc., Put it in that folder for the time being. Once you get up to speed, you can get as cute as you like. But for the time being, keep it simple. Now, once I've got my monster file, and also too, I make sure I put my monster file in the same directory. Now, I discussed how to do that in another tutorial. Generating a monster file is really, really easy and is the backbone of everything that you're going to do in ChassisSim. And once you get used to it, you'll generate it in a matter of minutes. Now, the next point in the game is once I've got my setup sheet and my monster file, I choose a car template that most closely resembles my current car file. In this case, it's the Dallara F310, which is a twin-shock formula-free car. So I'll click on that. Now that I've got that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys a little bit of a magic trick. I'm going to minimize the ChassisSim window and just put it here. And here's my setup window. And what I'll do here is I'll go to File, Save As. I'll click on my local disk C. I'll go into ChassisSim Technologies. I will go into my Models folder, my F309 folder, into my Zandvoort folder, and I will save this as a car file that is representative of this event. Now, for this particular case, I'm going to call it Dallara F309 Zandvoort example car. So we fill that in, and then we press on save. Now, to save us a little time, I worked through this a little while ago. And if I was starting this from scratch, I would be pressing save. Obviously, I'm not going to press save today, but for those of you following this tutorial, press save, and you're good to go. Now, what I will now do is I'm going to go through and click on the particular car components, for example, like the front spring, and I'm going to double check that against the spring specification. Now, one of the really cool things about ChassisSim, if you've got set up stuff that's set up in mixed units, you can go to select units to use and select the units you're actually going to do. So I'll just select the spring force for the time being at pounds force per inch. Click on the spring rate, lo and behold, 900 at the front. And let's have a look at the rear. And 700 pounds at the rear. So I'll just change that to 700 pounds at the rear. And then obviously I will go and I'll keep on going car file save as, or I'll just click on that disk icon that you see with ChassisSim. And you simply go through each particular bit, clicking a component of the car or a component of the tree structure and filling it in. It is that simple, and you save as you go. Now, what I'll do is, to save myself a little bit of time, I'll just reload my car file that I created earlier, which represents this setup. Once I'm done with that, I obviously go to save. I'll expand ChassisSim, and what I now need to do is I'm going to create a curvature, and I'm going to create a bump. I'm going to create a curvature, and I'm going to create a bump profile. To do that, really simple. Go to Circuit to create the curvature file. We go to Circuit, create filter curvature file. I import my monster. I will import my monster file. Once again, I go back to ChassisSim Technologies. I go to Models. I go to F309. I go to Zandvoort. Here's my monster file. I'll click here if using the monster file. I put in the frequency of the monster file. I'll kick off on a moving average filter. I explain the whys and wherefores of that in another tutorial. When you're starting off, leave it as moving average filter and also set it to 0.5. I click on my output curvature file. I call it track Zandvoort F3. Click on OK. Job's done. Now, one thing I probably should have gone through, maybe just a little bit further detail. If you're dealing with loggers where AY is positive for right-hand turns, make sure you've got that clicked. Most cases you won't have to do that, but particularly for some of you who are based in Europe who are using either Morelli or Bosch systems, you might just have to do that. So just keep that in mind. So once we've done that, what we're then going to do is generate a bump profile. So once again, I click here to add my monster import file. I'm going to click on Create Bump Profile. Now, given that we're using ChassisSim version 3.2.3 here, there's some really cool little tips and tricks I'm going to give you guys. First things first, we go through, we set up our damper scaling factor front and damper scaling factor rear at 1 apiece. Maximum bump rate, 0.2 is a good start point for an open wheeler. 0.3 is about right for a bump profile, so that's your maximum bump rate. Obviously, I'm zeroed on the deck, so I indicate that as 1, and I just put in my max bump and droop value. Now, to quote the Joker from The Dark Knight, I'm going to show you a little magic trick here. I'm going to click on Allow Auto Bump Scaling. I'm going to set that to free. The reason I'm setting that to free is this is going to do a couple of track replays that are just going to really help dial in that bump profile. So I click on that, and now what I'm going to do is click on OK. And now it's going to go through, after a short delay being ChassisSim Online, and it's going to do its thing. So we're going to let it do its thing, and when it's done, we're going to show you what to look for. Okay, so now what it's doing is it's doing a few track replays just to help dial in that bump profile so we get the right sort of magnitudes, and it's done. Now, when it is done, you're going to see a file called bumpprofile.dat generated. Now, strictly speaking, you don't do what I'm about to, you don't need to do what I'm about to do it, but because I'm a little bit of a fussy person, I like to do this. And typically what I like to do is just take a look and make sure that there are no crazy numbers here. There are no crazy numbers here, and typically what I'm going to do is I will rename that bump profile, which I did earlier, to this little creature here, bump profile Zandvoort-F3.dat. Now, what we now do is what we now do is that we go into circuit data, and we load in our curvature file, and we load in our bump profile. Now click on OK. We're now basically good to go. So what I'm going to do is, depending on the data system you've got, whether it's whether it's Pi, Morelli, Bosch, etc., you set up a data log. Now, once you're done with that, you click on the Start button. Now, let me show you a little bit of a magic trick here, particularly for those of you who are new ChassisSim users. If you click on Advanced Options, what I'd like to do to kick off is click on Allow Apex Speed by Corner Length and set that to 5%. I'll explain in an earlier tutorial, I explained the whys and wherefores of that. So we just click on OK. And now what we're going to do is we click on Start Simulation. Obviously, being the online simulation, there's a slight delay, and now it's going to go off and it's going to do its thing. So we're going to let it do its thing, and we'll discuss what to do once we've got an initial lap time estimated. Okay, so it's going through, it's doing its thing, and now it's doing our first flying lap, and we see an initial prediction of 95.13 seconds. Now, given that we're in the process of just setting up a real baseline model, my first inkling here is, as a rough rule of thumb, I'll just, now the actual lap was about a 90.9 second lap. What I'll tend to do here is I'll up the grip factor everywhere by about 10%. So typically the way I'll do that is I'll go to the front tires, set the tire force grip factor from 0.9 to 1, click on OK, set the tire force grip factor from 1 to 1.1, click on OK, and now what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll rerun the simulation. So as you can see, it's already a little bit. Better. So why don't we just take a short break and see what this comes back with. So it's going through, it's doing its thing. Now it's doing a track replay. Now, as we can see, a predicted lap time of 92.46 seconds. So that's doing a lot better. Let's have a little bit of a drill down about what that actually did. Okay, let me just show you what that initial correlation did. And as you can see, that initial correlation to kick off with actually wasn't too bad. We're pretty good in turn 1, not so good in 2, a little bit of work to do in 5, and a little bit of work to do on the tail end. But you know what? For a model straight off the bat, that's actually not too bad. By increasing the corner grip by about 10%, all you can see, we all of a sudden tidied a lot of this up. So at this point in the game, we're now ready to start using tools like the tire force estimation, the tire force modeling, going in particularly for places like turn 5 and particularly into turn 6 here. When I'm seeing stuff like that, that's usually screaming for things like corner camber. So looking at models like that. I should also add that red was actual, black was a simulation. But the point is, though, ladies and gentlemen, what we have just shown you is not rocket science. What we've just shown you is really, really simple. And I trust it's really dispelled a lot of the myths that simulation isn't hard. What we've just done here, you could do in a matter of minutes. If anything, the only reason it's taken me 10 to 15 minutes in this tutorial to do this is because I've just broken it down step by step. In reality, when I worked through this as an example, it took me 3 minutes. So that's really the sort of, well, I say not quite 3 minutes, but closer to 5 to 6 minutes. But so let's summarize the procedure of what you need to do. You grab your setup sheet. You create a folder in ChassisSim Technologies called Models, Car Name, Circuit Name, Event Name. You put in your setup setup sheet, and you put in your monster file, and then what you then go through is you work through the whole process of loading in a template that most closely resembles your car, which in this case was the Dallara F310 template, and then you go through systematically looking at your setup sheet, clicking at the front springs, putting in what the appropriate bar rates, spring rates, etc., is, car masses, etc. Then we create a curve. Then you create a curvature file. We then go to the bump profile modeling to create a bump profile. We then load it in circuit data with our curvature and our bump profile, and then you go through and you compare the data, and then you adjust your grip factor then you adjust your grip factors accordingly. Now, here's I should say your global tire grip factors accordingly. Now, this is not a perfect model, but this gets you going, and that is just so crucial. So, what I'd encourage you to do now, don't take my word for it. Go to the ChassisSim website, sign up for our professional online simulation, get your setup sheets, make a monster file, and go through this process. And you can see how in a matter of minutes you can create a model for yourself that will be an incredible aid for you getting the most out of your race car.